Morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Amy Dominguez-Arms with the James Irvine Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. The Irvine Foundation began its partnership with New America about 4 years ago. New America's founder, Ted Halstead, had approached us with the idea of starting its first state office here in California, and we were certainly intrigued with the idea and the potential value for California of an organization that had earned a reputation of providing innovative, constructive, often out-of-the-box thinking on ways to address some of the toughest societal challenges we face. And in its few years here in California, New America has already shaped policy discussions and policy making by, for example, advancing a new approach to expanding health coverage, fostering savings among low-income and middle-income Californians, and we are just so pleased to be a partner with this great institution here in California. And so I hope today's discussion might spark additional new ideas and constructive conversations about how California can best set its path moving forward, particularly given these tough, challenging economic times we face. So thank you for participating today, and with that, I'd like to welcome Leif Haase, who is the Director of the California Program for the New America Foundation.
Thank you so much, Amy, for kicking off this conference on California, the crisis, and the next social contract. You and the James Irvine Foundation have taken the lead in supporting social services, the arts, and issue-driven philanthropy throughout California. In these difficult times, this role has never been more important, so thank you. My name is Leif Haase, and I direct the California program of the New America Foundation, a nonprofit and nonpartisan think tank headquartered in Washington and active here in California. On behalf of the foundation, I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists and guests who gathered here to discuss the effect of the economic crisis here in California and in the states more generally, and principally to think together about how we might best move forward. As we convene here, there's a debate raging in Washington over the stimulus package, and as you know, this tug-of-war between the House and Senate is focused on whether to send or to cut some $40 billion in assistance to the states. This measure is being debated through a philosophical and political prism that echoes the fight over the package at large. It asks whether, without this aid, people will suffer now, demand will drop and growth will be retarded later, or despite its good intentions, the stimulus would overload states with an influx of money that they're unlikely to spend either effectively or promptly. This debate, as you know, is so critical because so much of the social welfare of citizens depends on state and local governments. They're spending on health care, education, crime, and affordable housing, to name only the most vital. This state role has always been prominent. It's become more important in recent years. The architects of the New Deal rightly considered the high watermark of the aggressive use of federal power outside of wartime. We're strongly concerned with giving maximum latitude to the states. And many more social responsibilities were devolved to the states in the 1980s and 1990s. As we're going to hear, states in general are facing a grim fiscal situation. At least 37 states and the District of Columbia face budget deficits in the 2009 fiscal year. And as you all know, California is in the deepest hole of all, with a combination of a chronic structural deficit, ballot box budgeting, and the economic crisis yielding a projected $40 billion two-year deficit. This means, among many other things, the prospect of steep cuts to Medi-Cal, Healthy Families, and CalWORKs, which principally serve working families, single mothers, children, and people with disabilities. It means reducing aid to public universities, even as polls show record concerns with the cost of college and college endowments fall. The University of California endowment fell $700 million in the final quarter of 2008 alone, possibly jeopardizing research and scholarship programs. And the UC system has reduced freshman enrollment by some 2,300 spots, or 6% overall. California's crisis, as in some but not all other states, has worsened, and it takes place against the backdrop of a severe housing crisis. An estimated 1 in 5 Bay Area homeowners owes more in their mortgage than their home is worth. and over 500,000 properties were foreclosed in California in 2008, or more than 1 in 4 nationally. The main purpose of this conference, however, is not only to describe the dimensions of this crisis in the states, but to find ways to lessen its blow. As Governor Dave Freudenthal of Wyoming put it in his recent State of the State address, "Here comes a summer storm. Not time then to forget the livestock and head to the barn." We look forward to hearing new thinking that ranges from better budgeting practices to novel uses of renewable energy and ways to achieve comprehensive health care reform without breaking the bank. And finally, this crisis requires new thinking, not only about particular policies, but about fundamental changes in the ways we think about the responsibility of individuals and governments and employers in fulfilling important guarantees of the social contract. In the face of globalization, enormous technological change, and changes in the workplace and family, thinking from first principles is vital. This is the purpose of the Next Social Contract initiative at the New America Foundation, which was launched last year with a generous grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. To quote from its mission statement, the Next Social Contract backs policies to support entrepreneurship and risk-taking, encourage long-term growth and broadly shared prosperity, and support individuals and families not as employees, as citizens. As many of you who promote social change but run up against structures that have outlived their original purpose here in California and around the country, you know especially this is critical. It's at the heart of the work of the New America Foundation, and I want to give a special thanks both to our colleagues in this initiative in Washington and to its funders. And so without further ado, I want to call on my colleague Mark Paul to introduce the first panel, Why the States Matter and Why They're Hurting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leif. My job here today is to briefly, to set up the day, is to be the bearer of many bad tidings. As Leif said, the new social contract, the social contract work that we're doing in New America is asking the question of how we align the mutual responsibilities of individuals, employers, government, and civil society in a swiftly changing world of a globalized economy. And in answering that question, we face the special difficulty that in America, government is really plural. We're not just balancing the duties among individuals, government, and civil society, but also there's a key question about how we divide government's duties between the states and the federal government. I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience how important the states are, but as we start the day, I thought it might be useful for us to briefly measure how big the shoulders of the states are. So I've got a few slides here just quickly to give a kind of mathematical description of that. First of all, if you have a pie chart there, okay. In education, the states and their local school districts provide 91% of the funding for public K-12 education in the United States, which is roughly a $500 billion enterprise in the United States. In addition, nearly 3/4 of the students enrolled in degree-granting institutions of higher education across America attend public colleges. States and local college districts provide 20% of the revenue for higher education, which is itself about a $400 billion enterprise in the United States. In healthcare, states pay about $1 in 6 of the nation's $2.1 trillion annual bill for health care, both to provide care for their own employees and for provide payments and coverage for tens of millions of low-income and disabled persons through programs like Medicaid and the Children's Health Program. And in the area of infrastructure, just to single out one area, surface transportation, states and local governments provide more than half of the funds invested each year in roads and in transit. Now, unfortunately for all of us, these big shoulders today are slumping under the weight of the current recession as revenues plummet and more workers lose their jobs and line up for Medicaid and social services. This slide, I hope we've got a map up there, shows the states with budget deficits in the current year, with the bigger gaps shown by the deeper colors, going from yellow to the very dark red. According to the National Council of State Legislatures, those gaps in the current year, the ongoing one, cumulatively amount to about $48 billion for those states reporting. And the states in gray aren't included because they weren't included in the report last week. The problem gets even bigger next year, with more states moving deeper into the red. Altogether, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in Washington, states face a total deficit of about $350 billion over the next 2.5 years, between now and the end of June 2011. The stimulus bill being debated in Congress includes significant assistance for the states, but is likely to fill, at very best, only about half of that $350 billion budget hole. California, of course, has been hit harder than most, trailing only Nevada and Arizona, two other places where the housing bubble swelled most and then exploded most dangerously. Here in this slide, I want to go back one. Got it? Pie chart. This slide illustrates California's current budget for the current fiscal year, and amounts to roughly $100 billion. And the slide allows me to steal a famous line that David Osborne, our first speaker today, has frequently used. And that is that California, like most states, educates, medicates, and incarcerates. That pretty much describes what states do. And as you can see in this slide, 83% of California's general fund spending goes to schools, colleges, healthcare, and prisons. California is now $15 billion short in the current year of being able to meet this budget. And since the current fiscal year is almost two-thirds gone, it faces in the last 4 months a problem equivalent roughly to 45% of its remaining spending for the year. To close that gap by cuts alone would require essentially that we close the schools and the community colleges March 1st for the rest of the year. That would roughly would save us $15 billion. Next year, California's problem swells to $25 billion. In other words, about 1/4 of this pie. And I'll leave it to you to imagine how we could take what quarter of that pie we would remove in order to balance our budget. That's the bad news. The good news is that today we will hear from people who've thought long and hard about the role that states play in upholding the government side of the social contract, and who will offer ideas for how we can move ahead. I can't promise you that by the end of lunch we'll have every problem licked, but there's a good chance we'll have a better idea about where we need to go. And with that, I'll invite the first panel to join me on the stage.